Hey guys, so if you've clicked on this, you probably already know that you're in for me talking about Mr. Fantastic or Reed Richards for quite a while now. He was recently given a value update or a buff by Kabam, and I am super happy with it. In a lot of ways, he didn't need it. He was already a very good champion with tons of utility, but it definitely makes him a little easier to play, makes him more satisfying from a damage standpoint, and is just really well done. So let's go through that. I don't want this to be an intimidating video for people who are completely new to Reed, so we are going to go over his kit as concisely as I personally can manage. I am going to timestamp this, so if you would like to skip ahead to the fights, especially if you already know how he works, go ahead and check that out in the description and on the video itself. So first off, we're going to look at these passives. Almost 1,000 physical and energy resistance on the R3. This is not huge, it's a long way from Guardian. I'm pretty sure it's less than Sorcerer Supreme. Not a huge deal, but it definitely helps. It makes him a little bit tankier towards most sources of damage, basically anything that isn't a critical hit. It does help me out a couple times during this. Next, we have that evade chance. It's 5% for each non-damaging debuff, not unique, but each debuff on either champion, and it has no upper limit, or at least not one that I've found, meaning that if you have enough debuffs up, this could theoretically get 2 and then pass 100%. And critically, it does not trigger with a well-timed block, so you won't go for a parry and then have him evade and it surprise you and you get hit in the face. Now, if you miss the parry, then he could surprise you, but honestly, you get used to that. It hasn't bothered me in quite a while. So then we have this attack rating is increased for each debuff on the opponent. It does say debuff, that means active debuffs and not passives, except for those applied by Reed himself, and we'll talk about that later. This was one of the main things that was updated in the recent value update. He now gains, I think it's about 30 or 40% more attack per debuff than he used to. And because Reed can easily stack a lot of debuffs, the number that I go with for a lot of my examples is 12, and I'll go over why. This really adds up to his damage. Okay, so then I want to talk about the pre-fights, which are what he used to be famous for. He can place these for himself, he can place these for other champions. I personally recommend that if you're fighting with him, you should almost always be placing at least one or two of these, if not all three. There are a few fights where you don't want to use all three because it will make it harder to do other things. We'll talk about that later. But because Reed gets persistent charges back for each unique debuff on the opponent at the end of the fight, and you can and should be keeping these up for the entire fight, you should get all three that you spend back and more. This also means now that they start at 4 and stack all the way up to 9 persistent charges, that you can get him up to 9 and spend 6 on other champions and still have 3 for him the next time you need to use him so that you can get back more. Reed is good enough to use on his own, or I wouldn't be making this video. However, because so many areas of this game require you to have a diverse practical team, it's really helpful that he can now more easily boost his team without hurting himself and not run out of gas. So like I said on the last slide, these pre-fight debuffs do scale in potency with rarity, so you are looking at the most effective version of them available, but they are quite useful even on the 4 and 5 star and even the 3 star if you've got it. But I'm just going to focus on these for brevity's sake. So first off, we have Petrify, which is probably currently the most popular one because controlling annoying regen and power gain is incredibly important in this game, and this is the one that's most likely to really help another team member. You'll see this for like, okay, well I need to use Human Torch for this node, but Torch has no native power control, so he's probably just going to eat special 3s. Well, let's throw a Petrify on the opponent so their power gain effects don't get out of hand. This also turns off Doctor Doom's aura, and since he is such an annoying defender and the aura is one of the worst things about him, it gets extra mileage for that. Then we look at suppression, this suppress the opponent. This is the one that I think gets overlooked the most because reducing the amount of power that your opponent gets when you hit them by only 25% doesn't seem huge until you start thinking about, okay, well, that means that they will only gain 3 bars of power where they would have gained 4, and that's if you're giving it to somebody other than Reed. If you are activating this as Reed and he can stack it 2 more times, then you're getting to the point where the opponent is only gaining 1 bar of power where they would have once gained 4 bars of power. Because of how incredibly strong this is, you will see several fights in this video where the opponent actually never reaches their 2nd or 3rd bar of power. So then we have the debuff siphon one. This one is really good, but it is probably the one that I am most willing to give up in most fights. This, like it says, makes damaging debuffs stronger when you apply them to the opponent and weaker when they are applied to the champion you're using. This can be really helpful for champions that already have a lot of resistance to certain effects. This takes it all the way. Like, a lot of people use Magneto for bleed nodes and put a point into, I think it's Coagulate is the one that reduces bleed damage so that he effectively has 100% bleed resistance. This would serve that purpose as well. And since there's no mastery for reducing the damage from shock effects, then this would also give Magneto 100% resistance to shock effects. I use this in the Cavalier Event Quest where science champions start out with 90% resistance to poison. This means they just heal from poison, like if all of them were Immortal Abomination. Very helpful. It's also good to place for other champions. This makes Human Torch's active incinerate stronger. This makes anybody who uses a lot of bleeds, like the Black Panther that just got buffed, stronger. It's a very good one, but it is probably the one that you are most likely to not need. So next up we have this careful study mechanic, which is that when your opponent activates a special, they get a debuff on them that makes that special weaker. The immediate impact of that should be obvious. If you're going to get hit by or block a special, it's nice for it to do less damage. And if you mess up and it hits you, then 2 copies of this apply, and so the next one does even less damage. Also nice. Because this is yet another debuff that he places, this will also increase his evade chance and let him do more damage. The only thing you have to watch out for is that if they throw a special 1 and then they throw a special 2, then the special 1 debuff gets removed and they only have the special 2. This is why when you're using Reed and you're trying to ramp him up and get these applied to the opponent, you want to focus on getting them to throw several of 1 special in a row, usually the special 1. Because if we look at this next part, once you stack 3 of these, then they're converted into a passive, and now you can no longer lose them. So you lock in that attack increase, you lock in that extra evade chance. And like it says, each of those passives actually counts as 3 debuffs, so 15% evade chance and several hundred attack permanently for the rest of the fight. I usually go for the special 1 first because it's much easier to get your opponent to throw 3 special 1s in a row than 3 special 2s, but once I have that locked in, then I will try and push them to the special 2, because if I can get this up, then the fight's that much easier. So as you see with his heavy, that pauses his pre-fights for 3 seconds. This is particularly helpful if you want to give yourself time to bait out a special that the opponent is holding on to, or if you just want to give yourself more time to smack him around a bit and build to a particular special. This is really important in more difficult fights because it can also very quickly refresh them. His heavy is only 1 hit, doesn't have the best reach in the world, but it hits them and knocks them down very quickly. This is your panic button for, oh, my pre-fight debuffs are about to fall off, I need to land a heavy, and then you don't have to worry again. You compare that to the special 1 and 2, which both knock down the opponent, but take quite a while to do so, especially the special 2. Thankfully, because they made the pre-fights last longer, 15 seconds instead of 12 now, It is much easier to keep them up, and you have to use this heavy attack panic button less often, but it's nice that it's still there, and you do want to be comfortable remembering to throw in parry heavies from time to time. This is why Reed is stronger on matchups where you can stun the opponent. You can use him for stun immune fights, but on those you are either relying on heavy counters, for which his moveset isn't the best, or you relying on those specials to refresh the pre-fight debuffs. And like I said, each of them takes a while, so sometimes that can get you in trouble. This next line, if there are no pre-fight debuffs, your special attacks are unblockable. So far the only offensive use I found for this is Yellow Jacket, where when he's hit by unblockable specials he loses core charge, so he won't go into meltdown. It's cool for that, but honestly I would never otherwise use it, and it's mostly a defensive ability. So if we look at his special attack 1, this is not necessarily the one that I spam, but it is useful. That taunt is another debuff, as is the stagger. Both of them are active, and so both of them give more attack and more evade chance. Additionally, if you are trying to get the opponent to throw a particular special such that you can build your careful study passives, then that taunt increasing their chance to throw whatever they have right now is helpful. Also, as Kabam recently clarified for us, even though staggers are very clearly nullify effects, they are not technically the same as a nullify, and so get around things like Mystic Ward, and therefore the fact that he uses a stagger here rather than an outright nullify is just one more piece of utility. So the special 2 is your bread and butter in most fights. It says when it's activated that it re-triggers his selected pre-fight debuffs, but critically it re-triggers new copies of them, meaning that if you already have each of them up, now you have 2 copies of each of them up, and this stacks at 3. This is what allows you to get 3 petrifies up and get that 120% reduction in healing and power gain. This is what allows you to get 3 suppressions up and get that 75% reduction in defensive combat power rate. And because each of those are themselves debuffs, this is what allows you to get 9 reliable debuffs up and keep them there as long as you keep refreshing with the heavy throughout the entire fight. And then when you combine that with the careful study passive for the special 1 you probably have by this point, this is where that number that I mentioned about 12 debuffs reliably being up comes from. Because if you spam the special attack until you have 3 copies of each of your pre-fights, and you have that careful study up, then you should have 12 for the entire rest of the fight. So lastly, we have the special 3, which I honestly didn't use too much before the buff, because if I was trying to use a damage character, I was usually using somebody other than Reed. If I decided to use Reed, it's because I wanted to completely lock down and control the fight, and so that meant that I was using his special 1 or his special 2, and often by the time those were properly set up and I could use the special 3, the fight was over, because although I wasn't using him for damage, he still had damage. But now, it gives you 50% more, and he hits harder on his base, so this one is actually pretty potent. As it says, you gain a passive Fury for 20 whole seconds, increasing attack rating by almost 900 for every single debuff. Again, not unique, just every debuff on the opponent. And like I just talked about, by the time that I throw this, I usually have at least 12 up on the opponent. So this is a huge attack increase. In my testing, this often works out to about plus 150% or plus 200%, meaning that this is actually more damage than Killmonger gets at Sig 200 from having both Reverb and True Strike up. Very powerful ability. So then we have the signature ability here, the most important part of which is this first bullet, which is that once you get those careful study passives up, they increase how much power you get from landing hits. Like I said, you are normally only going to get the special 1 passive up, but that's still huge. My Reed is only Sig 120, meaning he only gets 35% extra power instead of the 50% he's eventually going to get at Sig 200. But even that 35% extra is enough to get you from no power to having a special 3 ready in 8 parry heavies, and you'll see that later. When you combine that with the fact that he can stack 3 suppressions and reduce the opponent's defensive combat power rate by 75%, it's not easy to get both careful study passives up from the special 1 and the special 2 in the same fight, but it is possible. And at Sig 200, that means that Reed is gaining twice as much power as he normally would, while the opponent is gaining a quarter as much power as they normally would. This allows him, like I said, the theme here is that he will just control the fight. The second bullet point doesn't come up that often because there are only so many champions with unblockable attacks, although we just saw a new one added this month. But it is very helpful because, like I said, Reed will often have 12 debuffs up on the opponent once you get him rolling at 5% evade chance per debuff from his base kit. That's a 60% evade chance as your baseline. Then add 20% on top of that for an unblockable hit, and it goes up another 3% for every unblockable hit. And it says this caps at 50% for basic attacks, but it doesn't cap for specials. And I think even that 50% stacks on top of his base evade, but I admit that's something I haven't tested yet because it sounds like I would just get hit a lot and still maybe not know the answer. But this means that if you're dealing with opponents that have unblockable specials, like that Venom boss in Variant 7, when they throw those unblockable specials, if you're fully set up, you're probably looking at a minimum of an 80% chance to evade that special. And it only goes up from there. Like I've talked about several times, Reed is all about controlling the fight, and that includes having several safety nets for himself so that he avoids damage too. So lastly, Reed is a synergy monster, but I'm not going to go into all of his synergies right now and just focus on the ones that address him. You see a lot of videos on YouTube talking about the full Fantastic Four, and don't worry, I give you some fights with that team as well. But this one right here is why. Because it turns him into Void. For each unique debuff on the opponent, they take 4% of Mr. Fantastic's current attack rating as direct damage per second. And since the full Fantastic Four team also means that you generate additional debuffs, this often works out to somewhere in between like 400 and 700 damage per tick on the opponent just for daring to be in the same room as Reed. It's very, very powerful. But since you can't bring that in all content, we're going to go ahead and look at the ones that I do recommend. Invisible Woman is obviously not great right now. Hopefully she's also on the table for a buff. But if you have an empty spot, I do recommend bringing her, because Reed is all about his debuffs, and making his debuffs last 25% longer is really strong. That means longer stuns, that means more time to refresh the pre-fight debuffs, that means longer taunts and longer staggers. She really helps him out, as you would expect. The Council of Reed synergy I consider more of an Easter egg than a true synergy. It's a nice nod to the lore, but this is one that I would probably, again, only bring if you have an empty slot and after Invisible Woman. That said, it's fairly potent, and if you do have an empty slot, I won't say no to 30% extra damage. The Doctor Doom synergy, on the other hand, I think is amazing. The Doom side of this is well documented. There are people who have built taking certain Abyss fights around bringing Reed. I almost did when I was going through Path 3. And this comes up all the time in Alliance War, or just anywhere that you need an armor break, looking at you, Killmonger. But the Reed side of it is also very strong, because if you read through that, it gives him power each time a buff is nullified or it expires. And because it's 5% of max power, what this means is that if Doctor Doom's on your team, Reed basically has 3 points in the Mystic Dispersion Mastery, making him the only non-mystic with access to this particular bit of utility. and it's extremely powerful. Even without his stagger, when he's fighting buff-heavy champions, this just gives him that much more power, on top of the fact that he's probably already staying aggressive because he's controlling their power, and his Sig ability is giving him even more power. Reed has all the specials he wants to use. So skipping over to the tech and science one, because that one also helps him, this is a fairly famous one because She-Hulk has been good for a very long time, and because it applies on any debuff, that means it even applies when you stun the opponent. She-Hulk and Reed both have access to tons of debuffs, a lot of science champions in general do, and while it only starts out at 60% of the attack rating, that scales with attack boosts, so it scales with She-Hulk's passive furies, it scales with Reed's passive furies, and his passive attack gain from debuffs. It becomes really, really powerful in the right circumstances. Also, Vulture was obviously just buffed. I haven't fully decided what I think of him, but he's at least solid now, and Sentry is likely going to be buffed too. Dr. Octopus is already good. This is a very powerful synergy, and it's usually not too hard to squeeze it onto a team. So next up, we're just going to do a straight damage showcase. This is with the full Fantastic Four team, which I said wasn't terribly practical, but this is in the Science Quest for Cavalier Event Quest, where you are highly encouraged to bring science champions, so might as well bring 5 of them. Like I mentioned earlier, this one reduces the potency of poison effects by 90% in the first place, so with a debuff Siphoner, Reed is going to be healing from them. On top of that, when he purifies them, he's going to be getting passive fury, and so this just goes very quickly because, like I said, in addition to buffing his basic hits, it's also going to increase how much damage he does over time with the Fantastic Four synergy. I got a little unlucky with how many poisons I got on me early on, so I wasn't doing as much damage as I could have been. Look how it just shot up with that. But still, this fight is going pretty quickly. You can see how the extra debuffs from the special one really help. We also had the power stings, and he's down. Pretty quick fight, about a minute, 27 hits. So like I said, comparison, now we're going to use Human Torch with the bonus of the debuff Siphoner, but without spending his pre-fight. And he is also going to take no damage from poison thanks to the debuff Siphoner, and we're just going to see how he does in this fight. The RNG on the poisons is a little different. Torch gets boosted sooner, but Torch is uniquely good at doing an absurd amount of damage against Mystic characters very quickly, and you will see that this fight is almost the same number of hits, only a few less, and it's about as fast. I think it's slightly faster. So the fact that Reed can actually stand up to Torch, of all people, in this particular instance, says a lot about how much damage he can do when you can really open him up. So next up, this is still the Science Quest in Cavalier Event Quest from the last month, but now with a more realistic team. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the Doom synergy, even though it's not going to be doing a whole lot against Punisher 99, but it helped on some of the earlier fights. And I'm bringing She-Hulk because she's also very good, worth bringing, and gives him those power stings. But what you're going to see here is that even without all of that passive damage from the full Fantastic Four, maybe you're looking at bringing Reed to these quests and you don't have the full Fantastic Four team, you're going to see he still does plenty of damage. Also notice how few shots I actually had to block from that special one from Punisher 99 because of the evade chance, and we weren't at all ramped. That was just what we started out with. See how much the shock damage is already boosted from those 3 Furies and from the debuffs he has up? Took basically nothing from that second special as well. Now, 6.8k on a medium still isn't huge, but it's definitely respectable and it's very consistent. We also have that taunt up now, so the next time Punisher throws a special, It would have done almost nothing because the taunt would have been reducing his attack by 70%, and that would have been the third time he threw it, so we would have had the Careful Study passive up, reducing it by the damage he did by 75%, although I'm pretty sure those two are multiplicative, so it's not like his special would have done no damage, but the Power Sting killed him before we could prove any of that. Still, pretty good showcase of how good Reed is, even without the full team. Next, we're going to take this Nova boss, same idea. Here's where the Doom synergy comes in handy a little more, because Nova does have rotating buffs. We're going to stagger some of them are going to end. Suppression is going to help us not push him too much towards his more dangerous Special 2. I'm pretty confident on his Special 2 evade, but it's generally better to avoid it, right? Petrify is also going to reduce and eventually reverse how much power he gains when he dashes forward, which is another dangerous part of Nova's kit, because sometimes you're trying to bait out his Special 1, and he'll just dash back and forth a few times, and now he's at his Special 2, or God forbid, his Special 3. So now we have 2 stacks up. We're reducing that power he gains when he charges forward by a full 80%. We have 2 of the Careful Study debuffs up. We're refreshing. Now we have the passive, so now we have the extra offensive power gain. And look how quickly we're gaining power just on landing hits. Only 36 hits total now. That's our second Special 2. And now watch this. When Nova dashes forward, he actually loses power. It's not a lot, but it means that he is completely under control now. That was a 10k Power Sting detonation as well. Like I said, if you can bring She-Hulk or now Vulture, do it, because they really add up. Again, it's not huge, but remember what I said about how Reed does have energy resistance in his base kit, which means that when we are parrying Nova's attacks, the extra energy damage he does through blocks is getting reduced as well. So yeah, there's Nova done and dusted. Next we're going to head over to the tech mission for last month's Cavalier Event Quest. We're going to look at this Civil Warrior that has the global kinetic transference node as well as buffet. So Petrify helps shut those down. I also have 3 out of 3 points in Despair, but we're going to take it down even further. I also brought the Doom synergy, so notice that I am gaining power when his armor ups fall off, as though Reed were a Mystic. So now we're up to an 80% reduction, and because of Despair, that means that we've already reversed healing. He is still gaining power when he hits into my block, but very, very little. Notice he got up to 10 armor up buffs at one point there, and every time one of them expires, it gives us more power. That's why we've only landed 20 hits before we throw that second Special 3, and now we have the power gain reversed, and we have healing reversed. And notice that the shock on that one was a lot stronger as well. So see, that was a negative buffet proc, but I've also noticed that Reed's dashback, kind of like Void's, makes it really easy to not trigger dexterity if you don't want to. So you can control when and where you get that extra buff and how you proc buffet. Also notice that his evades saved me there. I thought I was going to be able to intercept Civil Warrior with that Special 1. I was wrong. I could have gotten punished, but Reed evaded. Because right now that's 11 debuffs up on the opponent, so that's a 55% chance to evade all attacks. So next we're going to head over into Act 7, or officially Book 2, Act 1, and take a look at this lane right here, which has Vivified, making its power control very dangerous, Power Alternator, making it even more dangerous, and the only way to keep it under control is to use debuff-heavy Science Champions, which Reed is. So what we're going to do here is we're trying to keep those buffs refreshed, but even though I know that I can throw a special and enervate him and completely turn off his power gain, I'm actually not trying to do that right away because I want that careful study passive. So there we go, we got it. We threw the special ahead of power alternator. Now he's fully under control. Now, I don't enjoy the design of this node because you can't control what debuff the Enervate replaces when it refreshes itself, and that can be kind of annoying, but Reed has so many debuffs that you can get around it. So you saw there, I let my pre-fights fall off, wasn't planning on that, but because he is still enervated, now they're back. Now we're doing that good Fantastic Four team damage again. And that is a realistic team for this, because you want to be bringing Science Champions anyway. Reed can take every single fight on this path, and I actually tested, he's faster than Torch for almost all of them. Even a couple of the Mystics, just you're kind of coming down to RNG there. But he can also take the boss it leads into, meaning that you can easily bring that whole team. So now we're looking at this Rhino here. That Tantrum node basically means that if you knock him down without one of a couple debuffs, including Taunt on him, you die instantly. Power Shield means that you need to knock him down to do damage by throwing specials, or use a couple of other things. You'll notice that our passive damage from the full team synergy is working here, and you only get those specials when he gets his, so it's not like you can power lock him either. And then of course Bubble Shield makes it harder to block. So notice that I did not activate Suppression here. I only activated the Debuff Siphoner and the Petrify, neither of which are going to actively help us, but both of which are going to give us more debuffs, and thus mean that we're doing more damage per second and that our overall attack is higher. I clearly missed that early parry, but that's just a great opening to talk about how awesome Adrenaline is when you have 6 stars, and to talk about how nice it is that Reed has those resistances in his base kit. Case in point, I swear, I took this Rhino down and had like 80% health left when I first ran Act 7, but I haven't been able to get a clean fight since. So this can be a lot prettier than it's looking right now if you play better than I did. But notice how much damage we're doing on those specials. You know, one of them isn't going to knock him out. It's not like when you use Cosmic Ghost Rider on Power Shield, but they're all doing a lot. And if you notice, the passive damage we're doing over time from those debuffs is actually getting amplified when we throw our special for the duration of it, because Power Shield is boosting that too. See, there it was 2480 per tick. That's an incredible amount of damage. We are also continually applying new debuffs with the special one, and that is inflicting new power stings, which then detonate, and you can see how much damage they're doing as well. This Rhino is definitely one of the more annoying bosses if you don't have a good counter. I know some people just used Quake, and that will work, but man, that would take forever. And I just found this particular fight fun the few times that I got hit, notwithstanding. So right there, notice how I refreshed those right at the end? I would have lost those 2 pre-fight debuffs before Reed's value update. The extra 3 seconds really helped me. And in this case, I will point out that that's 3 seconds boosted further by his synergy with Invisible Woman, which makes debuffs last even longer. As you can see, Rhino goes down pretty effectively. So then on to another Act 7 fight. We have this Doctor Strange here, who takes way less damage unless you have a Power Sting active on it. Now the node lets all Science Champions inflict Power Sting with their parries, but we are also building those passive Power Stings from the She-Hulk synergy. I also brought Doctor Doom, so you're going to see a little bit of power show up whenever he ends his phases. But look how much damage he took from that first Power Sting detonation. If you haven't done this lane yet, then even if you're not using Reed, just this particular synergy is by far the easiest way to run through it. So if I were taking this fight without She-Hulk, I might have actually not used the Petrify here, because he's going to get another special, and it's going to almost instantly kill him, but now he's probably not going to get another. And if he weren't already so low from those boosted power stings, then it would be kind of annoying just smacking him down here instead of waiting for him to kill himself again. I'm also showing you a cable later on that same path, but this is without the She-Hulk synergy. This is just Doom and Invisible Woman. There's also Power Snack on this lane, which can make some of the defenders, notice they put Doctor Strange, they put Cable, they also put Hyperion on here. The power gain can easily get away from you. So Reed's Petrifies are really helping, even above just him being a science champion. So you're seeing that other than that first one here, Cable is actually starting to get a bit stingy with his specials. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the special 2 and stack those power control debuffs. If he had been more trigger happy, then I would have just built to the special 3, gotten that passive fury, and then my next power stings would have killed him instantly. But I don't want to eat his special 3 while I'm waiting for that to happen. You have quite a bit of flexibility in Reed's kit, depending on both the matchup that you're facing and the AI, and I always really enjoy that. Notice there I actually got hit. I messed up the evade of that combo, but then I instantly evaded just thanks to Reed, and it saved me taking any more. So suppression is helping me be able to throw that heavy without instantly sending him red, and I'm just hoping he's going to throw it. See, there we go. That's pretty good. And now we're going to try and finish off this fight. The nice thing is that now that Reed's damage has been improved, it's significantly less painful to finish off fights, quote, the normal way. Whereas before, although he could do that, it's not like you were going to time out. I mean, you can't time out in Story Quest, but before it was often more effective to rely on some of the more gimmicky options like reversing regen or, the passive damage from the full Fantastic Four team. And now he works pretty well to just finish them off by landing hits and specials. So I should mention that this Cable is in 7.1.3, as was the Doctor Strange. The Rhino boss was in 7.1.2. This Sunspot here is in 7.1.6. And he has Footloose. Often, you can use slow champions to get around the Unstoppable and the Evade. Dr. Doom can nullify them with his stagger. But what I'm showing here is that Reed can also nullify them with his stagger. So, if you have Reed for some reason and you haven't ranked your Doom, then you can do this. Or maybe you run into something where Doom has class advantage or some other reason why he might not be awesome, but Reed does work. Reed also gets access to those power stings, and as you saw right there, that was over 15,000 on that last detonation. That's a pretty nice bonus here. Almost 10,000 there, even with only 2 stacks. I mean, this is the most recent story content. There are larger health pools in the game. There's the Of Legends stuff, but this is pretty current, and Reed's doing just fine here. This isn't the full Fantastic Four team. This is just She-Hulk, Doom, and Reed. He's doing plenty of damage, and he's keeping the node under control. See, like I said, I do like to push to the special 2 once I have the passive up for the special 1. But I don't expect to get another one up before this fight is over. Alright, I know this video has gone on long enough, but I have to do at least one crazy impractical thing, right? So I have used Reed against the Darkhawk and Abyss, both without the Fantastic Four team and with it, and he can solo in both instances. I do have those videos. However, they would have easily taken this over an hour, so instead I'm going to show you this Iron Man Infinity War, because this fight actually feels more ridiculous to me, because there's no regen to reverse. So all of the damage we have to do either by hitting him or by getting that passive damage from the Fantastic Four synergy. And right now you see 445 per tick is pretty solid, but it's going to take a really long time to do just that. That's okay though, because we're just setting this fight up for now, doing those reparries, landing our heavies. I know that he's going to power steal there, but now I have that Careful Study passive up for the L1, so I'm going to just try and land heavies after that. I think those are maybe the last combos I throw, because I realized that was a mistake. But now I can just throw heavies and build to my special 2 and start stacking these debuffs. And once I have those debuffs stacked and I can keep them up, that's when I'm going to build to the special 3, because the passive fury that we get there boosts the passive damage that we do just by having the Fantastic Four on our team. And from there on out, the fight's basically over. I'll speed it up pretty soon here, but you'll notice that when we get down to around 15, that's often when Iron Man Infinity War is at his most dangerous, but not for this, because we're already just using reparry and heavies, which he can't auto-block. And we don't have to worry about his power gain, because by the time he gets that low, we're going to keep these 3 petrifies up for the entire rest of the fight, so once he hits 15%, he's actually going to be draining his own power. So even though we have this Power Sting synergy, it's come in handy a few times. Actually, if I were going to do this again, I would probably bring a 5-star Mr. Fantastic instead to get that extra 30% attack bonus. Like I said, it's kind of an Easter egg or a meme synergy, but this is 100% a meme fight. You would never clear the Abyss with the full Fantastic Four. So, maybe sometime in the future. But as with all of the fights you've seen so far, I just want to clarify that although I do run Max Despair, which is very important for Reed, I am not running Suicides. None of these fights are boosted. This is the Reed that I use all the time. This is actually weaker than the one I take to War since I boost for War. So notice that passive damage. We're up over 2100 a tick. This fight is over. I think I do miss a parry somewhere in here, but let's just pretend that I was trying to get under 50% for courage to kick in. Notice that evade come in handy again when I don't perfectly time that heavy counter. Alright, from here on out, I'm going to speed it up. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope to see you next time when I put out some more reasonable length content. Take care.